Alex Gibney, Erica Sashin, Whitney Johnson, producer Ted Gessing, Juliet Eisner, John Jordan, Torsten, Pax Wasserman, Justin Milan, Lynn Kirby, Stacy Offman. And we have 3 guests from the film, if you guys want to come up. John Gibler, Adam Keats, and Carol Rowland. So they're a wealth of information if you have any questions for them. Oh. Does anyone have any questions? Are you?
Yeah, I just wanted to.
I do.
Oh, okay.
So,
Go right ahead.
I have a question. 30 years ago, a long-distance call between New York and California was in dollars, and now they're free. The Pacific Ocean lies outside of California. Why was there nothing in the documentary about desalinization and ultimately dealing with this? Water is an old resource. Technology has impact. Why was nothing in the documentary about that?
You know what, sir? There is so much to cover with this topic that it's. Oh, well, Jigsaw also produced a series that, if you want to talk about that, that's separate from the film.
We do. To your point, sir, we do deal with that issue in the series that's going to come out later this spring. It just didn't come up in this particular film, but we're aware of it, and that's a good point.
Any questions? Yes, sir.
Wow. Thank you, and thank you, Jigsaw. My 2 questions. One is Jerry Brown, who's sort of the Zen governor and the Earth governor, and yet he seems to be complicit in some of this. And the other is perhaps a stupid question, but I remember the Enron documentary. They were buying and privatizing water when they went under in South America and other parts of the world for profit. Is there any, since this is the water will disappear at some point, is there anything that substitutes the other ways to quote-unquote manufacture water or capture water? Because this is a worldwide problem, as you have so documented. So the first question is the Zen governor, but the important question, maybe stupid, what do we do when there's no more water? Not about capitalism, but there just is no more water.
There is no alternative to water, is there?
I can't possibly answer that question. I don't know. I just hope. I don't know. You know, I feel like it could be averted if enough people woke up in time and we stopped using it as a commodity and we realized that it's a human right, it's a sacred gift, and start treating it like that instead of ways to make even more money than God needs to live. I mean, you know, it's just greed, and I don't know that it's inevitable if enough people wake up in time, and if, I mean, I think regulation of groundwater, like the Hadley-Dickinson, right, that name of that bill, where they're starting to regulate it, and where they need to put monitors on wells, and where they need to be restricted in how much water that they can actually pump, the big agricultural people. I'm glad that it started in that direction. It certainly is going to disappear a lot faster if people keep doing what they've been doing. So I don't know. You know, I don't know what we can do. I don't know. Will the human species survive? I don't know. You know, it's a time, I think, when we have to realize this is one planet. We're one people. What happens to one of us happens to all of us. And you know, this is one of the basic sacred things that we have on the planet that makes life sustainable. And start acting like we believe that, and stop acting like we don't have enough money, we need to make more money. Poor us. Look, we've lost millions, but we're billionaires still. I mean, I don't know, I think it has to be a basic change in human consciousness, and I think that bringing this to light the way you did, Marina, is so important, and Adam and everybody that worked on this project. It's all, we don't know. We didn't know until our well started to go dry. I mean, when it gets to that point, you go, hello, what's happening? And will it be in time? And I don't know, I can't solve it.
Does anyone have any
It's a
thoughts
shifting
on
consciousness.
the Jerry Brown part of this question? Can anybody speak to that question? About Jerry Brown being the Zen governor, but yet having...
we all know about the twin tunnels in California. Jerry Brown's pushing these really heavily. There's a lot of interesting father-son dynamics that everyone's theorizing about. He's trying to finish his dad's unfinished legacy. But I think he's remarkably candid in this movie. I think it's remarkable what these guys were able to get him to talk about. I mean, I disagree. It is actually about capitalism, and I think Jerry Brown says that. We are basing our society on unsustainable overuse of our resources. He has a theory for how to solve that problem. I don't agree with that. Most environmentalists in California don't agree with that. And most people in Northern California don't agree with it. But that's his theory. I respect him for his, at least he's trying to solve the problem of capitalism. He's not quite the socialist that he used to be, but he still has some of that in him, I think.
We actually interviewed a farmer who fought Enron in Madeira, and we're going to have that as a separate piece on the Nat Geo website, because that Enron story, Alex made the film, so he can talk about that. But it's fascinating how they were trying to market water back then.
Yes, sir, in the back.
Yeah, so this is such a complex issue, especially with all the legal sort of maneuvering. And I thought the documentary did a very good job of elucidating some of that. But it was still a little difficult to follow. Can you talk about what this, I sort of didn't get, what is the significance of the amicus brief that was filed? What does it mean? What does it signify?
Yeah, I'll try to do this in 2 minutes. If you have an hour, I'm happy to talk about it. We have an appeal right now in the appellate courts in California that if we are successful in the appeal, it will open the door for us being able to return the Kern Water Bank to state control. One of the main arguments by the Kern Water Bank Authority, by DWR, in our appeal, is that all the parties to this other lawsuit, to that PCL lawsuit, agreed that Kern Water Bank Authority was going to get the Kern Water Bank. And so the significance of that amicus is that the PCL, represented by Rossman and Moore, finally decided, you know what, like this lie's gone on too long. We have to pipe up. Even though they're owed another $1 million, not Rossman and Moore, but a lot of different groups are owed another $1 million in this settlement they filed back, that they settled back in 2003. So they're potentially giving up about $1 million in settlement fees, and they are potentially in breach of their settlement agreement back then, and it's a very principled position.
That was a confidential settlement?
No, that was a public settlement.
The thing is, it is so dense, and we put it in there because we wanted to show how this moves bit by bit. And it was a major step that these lawyers who correct me if I'm wrong, didn't come forth for so long, just said, screw it. Like, these people are lying, and we don't care. We're going to file an amicus brief because the truth has to come out. So it's kind of like, it's difficult as a filmmaker to make that interesting. But we tried. So hopefully someone got it.
Other questions? Yes, sir.
Is there any plan to address like pesticide use in the Central Valley and how that may affect like water down the road, like in 20 years or greater? That might be a bit more complex question, I guess. But
Yeah,
It's a separate.
okay.
I'm sorry.
That's her next movie. That's her next film.
You had a question there? Yes. Do you have a question? Yeah.
First, congratulations to Marina and every one of you standing there. It's just a huge feat of
Thank you.
So, well done. You're on a very big platform, so I give kudos to National Geographic as well. Are you prepared for some blowback and this
It's outside right now.
Yeah, right. Exactly, but knowing, that this issue's been going on for a very long time, but now you're going to be on a very, big network, and frankly, I feel like though it's been written about and it's been, part of a journalistic inquiry for a long time, this could really, with the recent drought that California faced, this movie and then the subsequent series could really help affect change. Do you feel that, and is there preparation for that?
This question has Alex Gibney written all over it.
Well, I think our job, our job as journalists is to comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable. And so part of what Marina's done, as an agent provocateur, is to raise these issues in a very potent and profound way, so that all of us can reckon with it. I think one of the key aspects of this story is how much about the public use of water was kept secret. And so, yeah, sure, we're prepared for the blowback, but the blowback really is we're just part of a larger citizens' crusade to try to save the planet. And so Marina's film here is one step on that path as we're facing an administration that seems to be intent on ignoring climate change. So sure, we're prepared for the blowback, but I think the wind is at Marina's back, because I think it's time for a lot of people are ready to speak up about this issue. So we may get blowback from some powerful forces, but I think there's going to be a lot of blowback on that.
Gibler, where's John?
Yeah.
You want to say anything?
Keep going with more questions.
Okay.
I just had a question. As a California native, it seems that, still living there now, that we get ripped off for everything. Gas prices, water, electric, you name it. What can we do? As a normal citizen, small business owner, I got a family, I got enough stuff going on in my life, but this affects me. I let my lawns die, essentially. I didn't kill the fruit trees because I wanted to save those, but when the conservation hit, my wife and I shut the water off and let the lawns die. But, I hear this and it makes me pissed off. It's like, well, I want my lawn back, So what can we do, just regular people, to sort of help you or whoever fix this so we don't face this anymore?
Where's Lynn? Lynn has a good answer for this.
Complain to your representatives. Get on the phone, write and contact. That's all you can do, because really the state let this happen, and they represent us. So we need to let them know that we are not in favor of what they've done. They're supposed to represent us, and because so many things were done in secret, and we didn't have a voice in that. We weren't allowed into that conversation. Now's our opportunity to actually make ourselves heard.
You can also tell your friends about this film, spread it on social media, make sure it gets out far and wide and everyone sees it. Just as an aside. Yes, sir.
So, do you think there is some damage that could happen with the kind of recent dialogue in the last month or so, that the drought is over because of all these storms, that could cause some kind of, that your campaign is going that there's this huge drought?
Well, it's definitely helping, and thank God that there have been all the storms, but it's a drop in the bucket when you're talking about groundwater.
Yeah, it's more easing the surface water situation to a great extent, but that the groundwater situation is, it's not really. Maybe John, you want to take this?
First, good evening, everyone. The drought thing is kind of a ruse. California's always gone through cycles of drought and wet years for as long as there's geological record. The problems are patterns of consumption, right? Which ties into the desal question, desalination, because it's not a technological problem. The entire abuse documented in this film is one of incredible technological advancement, right? Dams and pumps and canals and moving the rain, as Mark Arak said, pumping water over mountains and so forth. Desalination just fuels that same engine, right? So the drought is something that's been going on. I mean, this thing we're calling a drought, it's part of a cycle, it's natural, but it's getting exacerbated, both wet years and drought years, with climate change. That poses a new problem. How is that going to affect this entire system, which, for me at least, is built not thinking about people? That's the whole point, right? The whole thing from the very beginning is built thinking about money. And that's the way it's been operated. And it's not just that the state let it happen, the state did it. Right? This idea that there's a sharp distinction between state and corporate actors, if you look into California water for a second, you realize that distinction doesn't exist. Of course, we can also now look at this individual being politely referred to usually as the new president of the United States, which I would stand with John Lewis and say, no, not legitimate. And many other millions of people. But yeah, so it's not just drought, right? It's how are cycles of wet and dry years being exacerbated in the context of climate change, and what does that do to a water system that was built to sell land and grow almonds in a desert?
Time for one last question.
Oh, I just wanted to add one more
Oh,
point
sorry.
on that.
Go ahead.
California was the last state in the union, or if practically, if not the last, to even start to regulate groundwater, which is crazy. They don't even know how many wells are in the state of California ever have been drilled, and they haven't kept logs on it. That's all been kept secret too. So it's now, because of the drought, it's starting to get its act together, starting to. But that's true of the aquifers too. It's if they're very deep in California, a lot of them, and it takes a long time for that water to and some of them will never come back. So very different. And this is we had a wonderful NASA water scientist, Jay Familietti, who was our advisor on this, who knows everything about aquifers. I would suggest that you also look into that and see what your groundwater situation is where you live.
One last question. Yes, ma'am.
I wanted to know, looking at that, even if the water was present again, wasn't being pumped off, once the aquifers collapse, can they refill, or theologically you narrow the space?
Did everyone hear that? What happens when the aquifers collapse? Can they be replenished?
Depends on the conditions of the aquifer, right? With the whole story here is this idea of a water bank. That was an aquifer that was completely drained, and the land subsided, but it didn't break open, right? And so you had still this huge empty space, which isn't really empty. It's more the nature of the soil there and how water fits in between a very rocky or loamy soil. And so the current water bank is actually just a drained aquifer that they flush water into and then pump it out again when they need it, right? So it depends. There are places where a collapsed aquifer could be used, right, by, number 129 on the Forbes billionaire list as an asset, which is kind of part of the irony.
But I also do want to note that these aquifers have taken hundreds of thousands of years to be built up underground, and when they are pumped up within a month, an hour, a week, it will take just as long to replenish them. So it's a long process. We probably won't be alive to see them replenished.
We are out of time, folks. Please thank
Thank you so much for coming.
Please tell your friends about this film and spread the word far online. If you're looking to vote for the audience prize, please film on your way out. Thanks for your support, and thank you for once again